with the second half of 4.1, we've got our second character of the patch, Wriothesley. I don't know how to pronounce his name, and he's looking pretty good. He's the first Cryo catalyst user, has really quick attacks, good multipliers, is voiced by fucking Wriothesley, punches things and yells "Ora!" So he's shaping up to be the game's newest in a line of extremely strong Cryo carries. Or is he? Because, as we'll be exploring in this video, he's got some glaring issues, dragging him down from potentially being on par with the other Fontaine 5-stars to more on the lines with a Yoimiya or a Forgor, and believe me, we'll get to that. Oh, we'll fucking get to that! But because this video will actually come out on time, unlike the Nebula video, it'll actually make sense to go over his banner. Yeah, well, let's look at this positively. Toma is pretty good, excellent Merchant Trigger, and I guess solid shield or option for Wanderer, and that's kinda it, but his constellations are pretty solid, so I guess having him on a banner isn't too bad. Chongyun is a solid character. If you have C6 Shanhe, and Dory is... And I guess we can also take a look at the weapon banner, which I did in last video, and yeah, it's okay banner. Half Sword is obviously a big W, literally one of the best weapons in the game. These two are pretty good as well, but then there's these two absolute stinkers. Well, I guess Rain Slayer is okay on bait there, but that's pretty much the worm in the bottom of the barrel within the inflamed rack. So yeah, not great. And then for the 5-stars, we've got Elegy, always a pretty good second weapon to have on a weapon banner, and then Cash Flow Supervision. And while it looks fucking sick, I mean, look at it go. Well, I'll get into it in the weapon section, but it's not the most weapon to have ever weaponed. So overall, his banners are quite underwhelming, but that is far from his biggest problem. So let's get into his kit. Okay, so to understand the issue with his kit, I'm obviously gonna have to explain it first. So let's look at his normal attacks. He just punches. I mean, look at that man go. And because he's a Cryo Catalyst, he of course deals cryo damage with all his normals. And they've also got pretty solid numbers, so obviously that's what his kit revolves around. The key here is that he attacks really quickly. So with all the right buffs, I think you can already imagine him doing solid damage. Though one thing here is that, as you can see, his AoE is, to be frank, quite shit. Pathetic even, making him quite a bit more annoying to play in certain situations, and also of course decreasing his DPS considerably as soon as 2 or more enemies are involved. Okay, then as for his charge attack, its multiplier is also fairly solid, making it also really no, I'll get to you, you fucker. Then looking at his E, similarly to again Yoimiya and Wanderer, increases his normal attack damage, and it also grants him some resistance interruption, though it's far from immunity. Now, the teeny tiny thing I didn't mention is that the normal attack buff has a condition, staying above 50% HP. And attacking with above active decreases HP by 4.5% per hit, which wouldn't be a big deal if he, just like Nebula, had a way to reliably heal himself, but yeah, let's look at his essential talents for that. Okay, so his A4 is the less impactful one, it just gives him some attack. It's useful, sure, but nothing special. What is his A1 special, and that's the first thing in quite a while that blatantly begs you to spend money on a constellation, but I digress, let's leave that for later. Now, in a vacuum, his A1 is pretty nice. You of course consume your own HP with every normal attack you do, and once you get to 60% of your max HP, you get a Gracious Rebuke, allowing you to use a charge attack for 0 stamina and with increased damage, and it also heals you for 30% of your max HP. Not bad, right? Only... if you remember. Now, the teeny tiny thing I didn't mention is that the normal attack buff has a condition, staying above 50% HP. So, well, you've got 10% max HP worth of wiggle room before your damage falls off a cliff, along with your keyboard. Yeah, no. You thought I would throw that fucking crusty ass keyboard out the window? Hell no. I ain't fucking going down there and picking up all these fucking crusty ass keys. Look at them. Well, it's not focusing, but anyways, I think it's enough to, like, just... And to make things even worse, it's got a 5-second cooldown, and while that would be a huge problem if it was just about the extra damage, well, your healing also hinges on it, so unless you're some sort of extraterrestrial being seeking to experience humanity's worst...
Men like me would not exist. But this is not a perfect world.
you're gonna need another healer on your team, which again I'll get into later, but yeah, it restricts team building, and so in a lot of teams, since you get your healing from elsewhere and it's too unreliable to get the Courageous Rebuke, you might just end up not doing any charge attacks at all. And sadly, he has yet another problem, and quite the frustrating one. It's about buff indicators. Because, okay, let's compare him to, again, Yoimiya and Wanderer, because let's be honest, this kid is basically just Wanderer's kid with Cryo. But anyways, for Yoimiya, it's quite easy to tell when she's buffed, because, well, she does physical damage if she isn't, and for Wanderer, he fucking floats. But for Wriothesley, yeah, he's got a fucking wolf, let's go! Only especially in Abyss with all sorts of shit flying around, it's really hard to see. Same goes for the red aura he emanates when he's got a Courageous Rebuke, and that just fucking sucks. And while I'm no visual designer, he could have had something to distinguish his buffed states a little bit more. Okay, not to forget about his burst though, it again is literally the same as Wanderer's. It hits 5 times, doing okay damage, but since it's not in one big hit, its damage is quite strong, especially in melt teams. Again, that fucking sucks balls. Just let me do a big fucking turn. Okay, Malfoy, you fucking coward, let me fucking let this burst! But okay, that's enough complaining for now, let's look at his build. And starting with the process of leveling him, thankfully the experimental field generator is a lot less cringe than the fucking chasm sea whore. Let's calm down, and same goes for his other material. Okay, well at this point I've just given up on ever having fun leveling a character, but thankfully because he consumes his own HP and it's Cryo, well marechaussee is still generally his best in slot, but if you're up against enemies that can be frozen, you can also use Blizzard Strayer. Now I wouldn't recommend farming it just for him, but if you've got a decent set lying around, you can definitely use it. As for the main and substats, well, you pretty much always want to go for attack, cryo, crit damage again, since he will always be used on marechaussee or Blizzard Strider. The chances of you not overcapping with a crit rate circlet are pretty slim, so it's pretty much the same as with Nuvilla, just go for crit rate. So fuck. Crit damage. Crit damage good. So substat wise, it's pretty intuitive. Crit damage is the best thing to get, followed by crit rate. Just make sure not to overcap, and then depending on your team, EM or attack percentage will be better. In melt teams with Bandit in particular, EM is gonna be the better stat, but since attack percentage is always good no matter the team, I'd say it's better overall. And then finally, of course, a little ER can never hurt, though as I already mentioned, his burst isn't where the bulk of his damage is, so anything beyond like 110 to 115% ER is probably more than you'd ideally want. And then we've got his weapons, and they're a lot less straightforward compared to Nuvilla's, so this is gonna be quite the long section. So then, starting with his 4-star options, you can use Ballad of Boundless Blue, Black Tales, Colonial Codex, Solar Pearl, considering Even Star. Okay, no, actually, his best 4-star option kinda depends on the team. If you already have a highly refined Mapamari, it's pretty good in Melt, otherwise you'd be better off crafting Flowing Purity. That's more or less his free-to-play baseline and pretty versatile. The new event weapon, Ballad of Whatever, can also be good if you need the ER, and then of course Woodsith is also a very solid option, especially again in melt teams where all 3 buffs are useful. Then as for his 5 stars, again you've got plenty of options. All these weapons are solid. Tome and Lost Prayers are a little more noteworthy, though with Prayers it's got crit rate, so try to not overcap. And then his best in slot is Cash Flow, yes, but the bell is basically just as good, especially at 0, because as I mentioned earlier, you might end up not doing any charge attacks whatsoever, in which scenario the bell's crit damage substat helps it almost outperform Cash Flow, and yes, for some godforsaken reason it's got a crit rate substat. Do not ask me why they fucking did that. At this point the only way I can possibly fathom why Wriothesley is the way he is that Hoyo's execs decided that renting a yacht and having old up Kaya cosplayers to work for them was more important than paid staff or electrical bills, leading the unpaid interns to be locked in the office by the electrical doors, their only source of nourishment being the condensation on the windows from their sweat and tears of desperation, and the occasional stray rats, their only way to freedom being a completed Wriothesley kit. And so, almost crestfallen and extremely tired, one brave warrior, notably standing at a height of 4'6", managed to recall from the depths of his demoisturized brain a faint, prompting him to, in a brief burst of red meat-filled consciousness, take the kits of Wanderer and Cockman, combining them to form Wriothesley's kit. Only having sent it to Liyue, he spoke words that echoed through the yacht's theater stage, previously occupied with arousal at a twerk-off between Alhaitham and Kave.
As kit as it is, it shall be so at his first constellation. For those unwilling to swipe, it shall cause naught but pain and suffering. His weapon, it shall be barely better than Wanderer's, for on him it is barely better than lost prayers. And furthermore, he shall not be in possession of more cave than Kaya, for surely there would be more than a mere mortal could handle.
And with that, he proceeded to dress up as a maid and disappear among a wall of testosterone-laden balls lookalikes. Now, while my theory is largely unconfirmed, what isn't is the fact that I kinda lost track where I was going with this tangent, so not to waste any more time, I should also note that Wriothesley's talents all contribute quite a lot to his overall damage output, so while his normal attack talent obviously has priority, leveling all 3 of them to at least 8 is a pretty good idea, making him a bit more costly in that regard than someone like Newbie who only really cares about his normal attack talent and nothing else. So then, in conclusion, building him is a pain in the ass, just like it's always been, but at least his artifact and weapon options are pretty good, so it's a pain in the ass that you might end up enjoying depending on what you're into. And with that out of the way, that leaves us with his team. Okay, so considering he is Cryo, the 2 most obvious team archetypes that come to mind are Melt and Freeze.
I'm getting tired of this game.
First looking at Melt teams though, you're obviously going to be using Bandit and Xiangling. Thing to note here is that yes, while Bandit on paper does make it impossible to perform your upgraded charge attack because of how it heals you at 70% of your max HP, most of the time enemies will hit you frequently enough that you could get below 60% to trigger that I completely went off script there, fuck. Well, anyways, as for the other Cryo character, well, you can go for anyone, really. Kaeron and Rosaria work decently enough. Shanna trades in personal damage for more damage on Wriothesley, which, depending on your investment, can be better or worse, and well, that's it, really. I guess you could also use a healer or shielder like Deona or Layla, but I mean, come on, use balls. Also, one thing to note about Shanna is that since you kinda wanna use her whole E for the more relevant buff, it makes it so that you can't fit 2 skills into 1 rotation, so you're stuck with either building a billion ER on her, obviously compromising her buffing capabilities, or extending your rotations, severely decreasing your DPS. But teams with her are still fine. I'm tired, let's move on to Freeze teams that are solid. Get it, and me. But I'd rather play him in a Melt team, since in Freeze you have to sacrifice quite a lot to get a healer slotted in, either losing out on Singshos or the second Cryo unit's damage, or Kazu's buff, and also, well, he shatters with his charge attack, so well, yeah. That's that. So again, they're okay, but not great either. Unless a Hydro healer, also massively buffing characters based on HP fluctuations, were to come out. And then we've got the Dendro teams. Woohoo! I hate my life. His most obvious team here is Hyper Fridge, and as much as it pains me to say this, for now, this is probably his best team, and yeah, it's Hyperloom, so not much to say here. Other than that though, he can be used to on-field Virgin teams, using Tomura as the trigger and Xingqiu for Hydro application. You're gonna be left needing to use a Dendro healer, and believe me, you will need a healer, but thankfully Yaya exists. Otherwise, you can also of course use Baizhu. And then finally, the last team I'll be talking about is Burn Melt, for no other reason than it's funny. Now, is it just a worse version of regular Melt teams? Well, depending on yes it is, and you die from your own burning, but it's funny, so play it if you hate yourself, I guess. So yeah, I don't really know how to segue here, but it seems okay, not to talk about leaks or anything, but just like Nubilet, will buff him quite a bit, and now, as I already mentioned, I think, honestly, writing the script has been a fever dream, but let's talk about his Yeah, just as I was about to say when I forgot how sentences work, Wriothesley's C1 is really good, but not just by increasing his damage. Instead, C1 really just looks like it was designed as his baseline kit, with Hayo then deciding that locking it behind a constellation would bring in significantly more money. Not only is his charge attack buff increased by a further 200%, but now he gains a Gracious Rebuke every time he completes a normal attack combo, and the cooldown is fucking halved. This of course course lets him use his buff charge attack significantly more often, leading to, of course, more damage, especially in meld teams, but also way more healing allowing him to, just like Nivelle, be run without a healer. And again, I'm gonna repeat myself, but it really feels like this was how his kit was supposed to work, and then they downgraded him at C0. Oh, and I forgot, charge attacking extends your E's duration by a second. Now, this can only happen once per E-cast, but still, his C1 is a stupid upgrade for him. But you know what? Fuck Cryo, he works at C0, so I highly encourage you not to spend money on his C1 because, well, if enough people do, that sure as hell is gonna turn into a trend no one but Hoyo's higher-ups want to see. Okay, then, looking at the rest of his constellations, no, I won't. They're decent, but fuck off. And that leaves us with one more section, and luckily it's the most objective, independent from Hoyo's grubby hands trying to engorge themselves with people's rent money. Of course, it's Wriothesley's cock. Now, finally on this front, there's nothing to really complain about, and quite the opposite. While he doesn't have the same step on me factor that Nivelle has, he could probably still arrest me, throw me in a dark, moist dungeon. And also, he is of course basically a JoJo character running around fisting people while yelling. Voice acted by the one and only Ono Daisuke, and I just realized while writing this script that he also voices Xingyan. Well, okay, listen, I've not played Star Rail in like 3 months, and I don't even have Xingyan. Fuck off. Well, Wriothesley is still a Giga Chat, despite the fact that I've still not completed 4.0s, not to mention 4.1's for Conquest, but those are the details no one cares about, so let's move on to the conclusion. Okay, yeah, so in conclusion, Wriothesley is okay. I place him somewhere close to, again, Wanderer and Yoimiya in terms of strength at C0, but if you want to vertically invest, yes, his C1 massively improves both his damage and ease of use. Just make sure you know what spending money on what is basically his baseline kit will tell those fetishists occupying Hoyo's C-suites. Now, his difference to Wanderer and Yoimiya is that Wriothesley still has quite some room for improvement, with not officially announced but already leaked 4 and 5-star characters synergizing with him quite well, so if you're deciding between getting his C1 or Furina, I'd advise you to, well, plainly said, get her. She is gonna be quite good with him and not feed into Hoyo's unasked for fetishes. Cheers. Addition here, can you tell I just woke up? Anyways, after having done the Abyss runs and shit that you've seen playing in the background, I'm gonna be honest, while yes, I'd still rank him somewhat lower than the other Fontaine 5 stars. It just feels really good to play. Now, that doesn't change the fact that locking his base kit behind AC1 isn't a base, in fact it's really cringe, but I found that you really don't need it. Also, I mentioned buff indicators pretty early on, and while yes, especially for those with garbage eyes, that could potentially be a problem, honestly pressing E should be indicator enough that your, well, E is active, and as for the Gracious Rebuke, while the aura itself is quite hard to see in combat, yes, I was still able to reliably use my enhanced charge attack because, well, this thing pops up, and also you can just look at your own HP, it works, yes. And okay, last thing here concerning his self-damage and healing. Again, it's still a shitty move by Hoyo to allow you to only heal yourself once every 5 seconds, realistically like 6 or so, because you do not use your charge attack frame perfectly. But in teams not rocking a shielder or healer, only like Xingqiu or Toma, I personally found that to be enough, and now obviously there are some enemies that deal more damage and are more aggressive, and you know, you will need a healer there, but you know, as I said, that's obvious. Anyways, okay, conclusion time, and while he feels better to use than I thought he would, especially in Meld, sadly he is still worse than Copman, so I cannot place him as the best character of all time, sadly. Instead, let's put him here.